Hello, and welcome to this TED Talk. Today I'm going to introduce you to a designer and friend of mine who I've known for 20 or so years, Dave Sedgwick. Dave runs his own studio, Studio DBD in Manchester. He's been recognised by D&AD, he's won awards everywhere. His work is on brand new, on computer art. He's well known within the industry. He produces work at a phenomenal rate, and I don't know how, and I'm a little bit jealous about that. That's something else. When I was a graphic design student 20 years ago, he really helped me when I was doing my internships. He helped me make contacts and he helped get into industry, and he taught me a lot about how to get on and get busy in industry and get out there, basically. So since then, we've obviously gone our separate ways, but it was a great pleasure to chat with him, meet up with him again, albeit via Zoom, see what he's been up to, and learn a bit about how he made his mark and also how he's continuing to make his mark today. Okay, over to Dave. Thank you. So, have you got a drink and stuff? Have you been to the loo?
I've got a beer here right in front of me. Yeah, cheers. Yeah, nice fresh water. I'm ready when you are, Ted.
Okay. How and when did you first make your mark in industry, do you think?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, first of all, thanks for asking me to take part in the series of talks that you're doing. So I appreciate that. And I think, it's quite humbling and quite nice to suggest, for you to suggest that I have made my mark in the industry. I think for me, speaking honestly, the idea of making your mark is something that drives me on sort of daily, weekly, monthly, with every project I do, with every client meeting, with every time I get out of bed in the morning. I think once you start to think that you've made your mark, then you probably may as well give up being a graphic designer.
Is that the beginning of the end?
I think that's the beginning of the end. When you can say, "Oh, I've made my mark, that's it," then that's the end of it. So for me, I'm still sort of trying to make my mark in the design world. Because there's plenty of people much better than me at making marks, and I just kind of do the best I can do. But I think sort of, to answer your question, because otherwise we'd have to cut this entire meeting, this conversation down to kind of 30 seconds. I think, in terms of making my mark, in terms of realizing the fact that I was actually a graphic designer and not a student or a graduate anymore, was probably quite early on in my career when I worked for an agency called Race International, which was my second job. My first job was for an agency called Tucker Clark Williams, or TCW, which probably most people won't have heard of, but obviously they were a big agency back in the late 90s here in Manchester. And many of the people who worked at TCW have gone on to set up other studios in the north of England and the rest of England, really. So they were kind of pioneers in a way, and probably because and you might remember this, they sort of bridged that gap between advertising and design.
Yeah.
So we were told at university that you had to choose one route. Advertising was all about ideas and design was all about aesthetics. And in them days, agencies did one or the other. You had ad agencies and you had design agencies. And Tucker Clark Williams and agencies like them, probably like The Chase as an example, they tended to sort of, in my opinion, they were sort of blurring the boundaries between advertising and design. And I found that really interesting because I like the idea side of things, but I also like what things looked like. And Tucker Clark Williams was my first job. I was fortunate to get that, but I joined at a really crazy time there, and they were going through lots of difficult times. Staff were leaving and things like that.
What was the late 90s? Was that post-recession or?
God, I mean, I probably would have, not really know exactly. I mean, I graduated in 98.
Okay.
No, I didn't at all. That's a complete lie. I started university. Cut that out. I started in 98 and graduated in 2001. So actually, my first job was, so actually going back, was probably beginning of the millennium, really.
Yeah.
So trying to think what had happened at TCW is all the creatives had left to set up Love Creative. And left a skeleton amount of staff, and obviously a lot of clients migrated over to Love. So it was a really tough time for my first job, and a lot of redundancies happened, and I unfortunately got made redundant after 18 months. But one of the things that I found a lot easier at that point was getting my portfolio in to see other places. Something that I'd found quite hard as a student was getting your portfolio, through the, getting to see people, getting your foot in the door.
Yeah.
But once I had a couple of years experience under my belt, and this is pre social media, this is pre even probably websites for agencies. So the only way other agencies were able to see what other agencies were doing, really, unless they were in the design press, was by seeing the staff that had worked at that agency's portfolio. So when a designer left an agency, people were quite interested to see what work was in their folio, because they hadn't seen what Tubby Clark Williams were doing. So I went to work for an agency called Race International after that. And I learned an awful lot with Richard Morris, who was the owner. And I started there as just on a small amount of money weekly, kind of a bit of cash at the end of the week. They were using a lot of freelancers at the time. And they just gave me the odd brief to do. And this particular brief came through the door, which was to design a kind of creative campaign for a gym in Sheffield. And I came up with some good ideas, and they pitched them in, and the client loved one of the ideas, and we kind of made it work. It was, a really nice concept that got a little bit of coverage in the design press, and that, the design press, by that I mean things like Creative Review and Design Week and those kind of publications. And I know Creative Review's still going in kind of the digital format, but like Design Week and some of those magazines obviously sadly have gone now. But back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was starting out as a designer, they were the magazines and the publications to get you working.
I mean, people used to fight over them when they came to the studio, didn't they? I mean, that was the relevance of them, really.
This was it. And again, going back to, it was no Twitter or Instagram, so people didn't know what agencies were doing, really. They were just doing their own work in their own little studio. And Creative Review and Design Week and those kind of things came in, as you say, and people were desperate to see what was going on. And I sent that work that I'd done for Race to Creative Review. Didn't think I'd get anywhere, and they put it in the magazine. And I guess at that point, although I can't describe that as making my mark in the design industry, I think that set the tone for me to start to believe that I genuinely could be a graphic designer. I could do it, and I wasn't pretending I wasn't at university. I wasn't a graduate. I was actually working for an agency and producing work for that agency.
In the context of making your mark as well, there is the extent that your biggest competition is always yourself.
Yeah.
Totally. So you're always just kind of like trying to reaffirm to yourself that you need to go one better than last time, and so on and so forth, to keep, once you've made your mark from that point on, it's a question of maintaining the standards, basically, isn't it? And goods, like Craig Oldham said, good's not good enough. You've got to go one up every time. From that point on, and then was it when you were working at Race that you touched on or did your own pitch with the Liverpool-Manchester Design Initiative?
Yeah, I mean, that just touching very briefly back on what you just said there, I think that's it. I mean, I've been made redundant from my job, and that was pretty shitty, really. Like, getting made redundant from a job. I was young, and I didn't have, we were renting a small flat in Manchester, me and my girlfriend, and it wasn't like I had big overheads or a mortgage and cars and all that kind of stuff. But it's still, it was scary, it was daunting, and getting made redundant is a bit like being rejected and being dumped in a way, and you feel really shit. And to go to Race and to be given an opportunity to sort of work on a few projects, I'm really grateful for that. And I think I still remember that. It's that kind of drive all the time as me, 20 years later, of kind of constantly being fearful of failing or being found out or not being good enough. And I think that's the drive. That's what keeps you wanting to make your mark. And going on to what you just touched on, I can't remember how it came about, but it was a company called Liverpool and Manchester Design Initiative, and they were kind of a charity that helped designers and creatives, graphic designers, furniture makers, 3D designers, all sorts of creatives in Manchester and Liverpool. And they did an event, 100% Design and Designers Block, which is, or they attended an event down in London every year, and they kind of represented, I think, like 10 designers from the Northwest at that event. And they obviously were given a little bit of funding to kind of help them and support them, and they were asked me and various agencies to pitch to create the marketing collateral for that. I can't quite remember how it came about, but I was really fortunate. I won that pitch on my own, completely, entirely on my own, not working for an agency. So I'd only a year or two experience out of the industry, and I won that pitch against a couple of relatively decent studios in Manchester. It felt like just this really, really positive kind of amount of, positive moment.
I was just saying, I can remember seeing it. Like, I can't remember everything anymore, but I do remember seeing it, and I knew you by this point, because as I mentioned in the introduction, obviously you were like incredibly helpful to me, actually getting me into the industry as well. So I met you when I was when Richard Morris gave me a placement at Race.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing that Isle of Northwest piece in most likely Design Week or similar, and just being chuffed really, because someone that I knew was in the papers basically.
And also somebody that's not, wasn't a big London design agency. It was some guy, still kind of renting a flat, living with his girlfriend, not really sure what, how to even boil an egg. It's getting work getting work out into the magazines and the publications and winning pitches, and it was a nice idea, Ted. Like, it was, it's been done to death now again, the kind of pastiche of the Milton Glaser Isle of New York symbol, but it was just changing one letter and then creating the whole kind of I'm sure there'll be images on screen and how that looked. It just a simple idea translated into the whole project, and they loved this concept that people would be walking around London with these, postcard packs that have big, bold, I love NW, the Northwest, and that kind of, I think that's what won it for them in a way. It was a little bit of kind of two fingers up to the south and kind of, big thumbs up to the Northwest.
Northern powerhouse.
Well, before it was even termed a phrase, I think, but so that was great, and then the following year, won it again, won the pitch again to kind of do the next year's one, which was just great. So 2 years running, won the opportunity to design the sort of branding and marketing material for the event. So we just kind of tweaked it slightly. I think it was still the I Love Northwest concept, but there was just slight changes to it. So I don't know if you can recall that one, but we did 2 years of Manchester stuff. I guess, I was just really happy that I'd been able to fulfill, come up with an idea and fulfill it, basically, get it designed and printed and produced on time, on budget for the client, and without any help, without account managers or creative directors or anybody else telling me what to do. It was just me being able to do that. So that was a great project to work on.
And that's when you grow exponentially, isn't it? It's almost like going back to being a student again, where, it's probably even different to that in that you don't even have a tutor there for guidance at that point. It's just you completely working on your own, looking after everything.
Yeah, and I guess probably up until that point, I was probably treading water really, at my first agency, and then working at Race and producing work for myself, starting to do my own work in my own time. I guess that's quite an important thing just to touch on really briefly is, it was round about then that I started really understanding that design isn't just something you do 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. It became all encompassing. It became something I lived and breathed. So, I went home and I would, obviously I'd be on my computer, creating work for people. And I even started doing work for people that didn't even want work doing for them. So I contacted at the time Sale Water Park about their branding. Their logos was just awful, and the whole sort of everything I could see, I did it. I don't think they paid me. So if you're watching Sale Water Park, I won't pay you. But I just was doing work in my own time. I did a little logo for myself. I just had this little idea of a Cloud 9 symbol.
I remember that one.
Cloud 9, Again, just dead simple, and I just did it, and then I can't. But did it, designed it, was happy with it, and then I found this was when the internet was really starting to take off as well. 2003, 2004, whatever. And I contacted a balloon company called Cloud 9 Balloons in Devon or something. And I said, oh, I've found your business online, but your logo's shit. Do you want this one? And they were like, yeah, we'll have it. So I sent them that, and they got this logo for free, which I'm not recommending students do work for free, but, I am recommending that you truly take graphic design honours. If you're going to be a designer, then it's not something you can kind of quantify in terms of hours. It's something that you become a graphic designer, and I just love doing it, whether I was working or whether I was doing it at home.
Yeah, and it's a way of life, because that almost takes into almost like a religious sect area, but it's just a way of doing things. And Mike Rigby has said to us in a previous talk that it's just a way of looking, basically. Everyone else looks at things and just sees them on face value, but a designer like you looked at Cloud9 and the words, and you saw something out of it, and then we're able to make a connection with that company. And it's just looking at things in a slightly different way. Like, could it be different? Could it be better? What's wrong with it? How? And that's the designer's way, I think, is that everything that you see, you assess as a problem that requires a solution.
Yeah.
And then therefore that starts to happen when you go to a restaurant and you see the menu, or you see the identity of the restaurant, or you're in the taxi and you're reading your phone and you see that app icon, or whatever it may be. That's when you start to do that as a 24/7 practice, living as a designer. That's when you start to do stuff, basically, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think just on that subject slightly, one of the things that I learned from doing the I Love Northwest project for the design initiative was that one door always leads to another door as well. So from doing that project and from getting that out there, people saw that I had my name on the bottom of the design. This was, in them days, you loved putting your credit on the bottom of any design print that you did. And I put my name and telephone number on the bottom. And I remember a guy called Barney Hare Duke from he now works I think at the British the ceramics company in Stoke. I can't remember the name exactly, but he's very well connected in the creative and cultural industry. He asked me to do his design work for him, his branding work for him, got some work for the Arts Council Northwest, and various doors open due to doing that project. And I think that's also really important to say as well, that it made me realise that by saying yes to stuff, other work came from that.
Yeah.
It's not just doing that one project, getting paid for it, and then that's it. You never hear from them again. It's actually learning that that's how you make the connections, and you connect all these dots, and you start to get clients and people coming to you for work. So I think that's important to make that point as well.
Absolutely. So if we just so if we take the Isle of Northwest and that kind of design initiative work, as a kind of like, I don't know, not the beginnings of your career, because you're always well into it by then, but that was establishing. I mean, the interesting thing is that at that point I was a junior designer at an agency, as were my peers who'd made it into industry from college, whereas at that point you were then starting to develop a name for yourself, which was interesting, because you were being starting to be seen even at that point, I think, like alongside. You're being mentioned in Creative Review alongside the names of agencies, which was quite an interesting position that you found yourself in. But I think that was only through. I think there's an element of your personality as well, which would probably. I think like you probably wouldn't want to admit this, but I think you're just a lovely bloke, basically, and I think that's been really helpful to you. But I think that's also, like, if you cycle back or forward 20 years, I was just looking at your. I mean, you probably know me a bit better, and the students watching this will probably know me quite well. So my social media is like zero. I've just noted you got 16,500 followers on Instagram and 9,000 on Twitter. And I think that some of that just has to come from the fact that you speak your mind, and you're honest, I think, as well, to a point.
Or you could just pay for them, which is what I did. I think with Twitter, I was quite a late kind of person. I didn't come to Twitter till a late stage, and whereas Instagram, I was fortunate. It was one of those programs that I just sort of got in quite early on with as well, and our work has kind of grown with Instagram, and it's also brilliant for me to share the work I do kind of on social.
It must be, within the making your mark vernacular, if you like. It's an amazing tool, Instagram, when you look back on it, for a designer like yourself or any creative practicing, just to get your work. I mean, it could for any students listening here, it could quite easily work as a portfolio site, couldn't it? Just a well-ordered Instagram.
It does work as a portfolio site for me. I mean, my website, if any students are listening, like, you know, is relatively old. Well, it's dated already.
Yeah.
You know, it's just this carousel slideshow, because I keep meaning to actually spend the time creating a proper website, and I will do that this year, hopefully. But Instagram is just so instant. There's a phrase for them for free, but it is, you know, it's this idea of producing work, taking some images of it, or kind of cropping it as a square or a story and putting it out there. And I mean, I get, you know, a good sort of 50% of my work through Instagram now from
Really?
clients around the world. Yeah, you know, constantly getting kind of contacts from people who've seen it. So, you know, for anyone listening, I guess that there's absolutely no reason why you can't get an Instagram account and start putting some of your work out there, and you never know where it might lead to. So yeah, Instagram's been brilliant. But you know, it's lovely for you to say all those nice things about me, Ted, and especially as I haven't paid you any money to do that. But you know, I guess really, you know, jumping back a long, long way, you know, going back to my first job, you know, I'm the kind of person I try and get on with everybody, whether you're from, like, you know, the director of a company, or you're the person cleaning the floors. Like, you know, everybody's got a story to tell. Everyone's got everyone's just fighting their own battles and stuff. And I think it's really important to remember that. And it goes back to just having a hard work ethic as well, that probably is instilled in me from an early age. You know, my dad, you know, had me out working when I was kind of, you know, 11, 12, you know, I was brought up in a small kind of agricultural village near Southport, and, you know, it was all farm work. So from sort of, you know, from the first early ages, like I was making boxes, cardboard boxes for like 2p a box, and picking lettuce and doing farm work really, and getting paid for it. And I think that kind of grafting, just it instilled a sense of working hard, being paid for your work, and just being proud of your own achievements. And I hated it at times. I remember thinking, oh, God, I just went all throughout playing at summer holidays, and I was out working. But I guess looking, you know, 30 odd years later, you look back and think, well, it's allowed me never to sit back and think, oh, I can just wait for the work to come in, or I can just, you know, produce some shite and send it out to a client, they'll be happy with it. It consistently makes me strive to do the best that I can with the work I do. And, you know, there are people who do it a lot better than me, but, you know, I want to be proud of the stuff I do at the end of the day. I want to look back and think I'm doing the best I can for the clients, the budgets we've got, the time constraints we've got, and just do the best I can do, really.
Yeah. I think that's just a really good trait of any designer as well, because before we started recording today, I was just talking about your Christmas card that you did with Phil Crisp, obviously for the Christmas just gone. And it was one of those ideas that I find annoying, because you think, oh, why didn't I think of that? And then I think all the good designers that come and speak to us, like I remember Jim Sutherland mentioning this, and Jack Rennick as well. When you speak to them after the talk, like, they do look at other designers and go, oh, why didn't I think of that? And I think it does seem like a constant thread. Like, there's no arrogance amongst the top. Like, everybody looks at everybody else's work and just delights in it, enjoys it, feels some form of jealousy, and then therefore strives on to try and do something themselves that's different and equally good, basically.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you can accept that you can't come up with every single idea, you know, then you're all right. I mean, I love seeing good work, and people like you've just mentioned, you know, produce fantastic work. And again, a lot of it is, you know, simple idea, well executed, you know, clients happy with it, and it does a job. And I think that's fundamentally what we do. And I think that's what we just got to remember as designers as well. You know, we're not, I mean, your current climate, current situation, coronavirus, you know, the key workers, the people who are stacking the shelves at the supermarkets, obviously the NHS doctors and nurses on the front line, you know, they're people that are really, truly making their mark in the world, you know. And what we're doing is, you know, what we're doing is, you know, we're fortunately talented in being able to, you know, create ideas and fulfill them on you know, using the tools of a computer or similar. You know, I never want to get ahead of myself and think that I'm certainly not, you know, a doctor. You know, one thing knew I wanted to do when I was younger is be involved in the creative world. I mean, I wasn't particularly good at maths. I failed GCSE maths. I don't have maths GCSE. I was terrible at sciences, and language skills were awful. But what I was good at was art, design, being creative, coming up with ideas, making things,
Is there anything specifically that you would say, again, winding it back to the, I don't know, the questions in hand, like, is there anything that, whilst you're working those farmers' fields, if you like, was there anything that made a mark on you that you knew that you were going to art and design? Like, was there a program that you watched, or anything that gave you a sense that art and design was your trajectory at that point?
I think there's a few things really. I think the first thing probably is music,
Really?
which I remember. I remember being obsessed with kind of tape cassettes, the little kind of tape cassettes, and collect, and just being, just kind of getting them listening to the music. But whilst the music was on, actually really studying those kind of tape cassettes, and the packaging and the photography and the art direction and the time. Obviously, I didn't know what that was at that point, but I still remember back in them days.
Yeah.
I remember being in the fields having like having just a cassette Walkman, which you might have to put a picture.
I'll put a few pictures of these things on.
Yeah, making me feel very old. But yeah, I remember listening to that. Big headphones on and just kind of like doing my work with music on. And then when you get your break, you had no mobile phone. You couldn't scroll through social media. There was nobody else there in the field to talk to. I didn't even have a newspaper, so the only thing I could sort of look at was tape cassette covers. I remember having MC Hammer cassette and Michael Jackson and people like that back in the 90s.
Yeah.
That kind of music, Smash Hits, 1990 cassette cover, and just looking at the way the type was set. So probably subconsciously, I was that kind of fulfilled sort of an interest in me. I was also really into WWF wrestling at the time. I was really into that, and there's a lot of drama and theatre in and a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of creativity in the costumes and the way they act and perform. And I suppose all these things helped me to subconsciously were sort of taking me down a path where there was a lot of things going on artistically, creatively, visually, to kind of get immersed in.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's hard to explain in a way, but this was obviously pre-internet, and the only place that you got your visual fix from was 4 channels on the telly, a magazine if you could afford it, and then, like you say, tape cassettes, CDs, even vinyl was fading a little bit by that point. And then beyond that, like if you were lucky enough to get a trip into Manchester with your parents, I guess, and you've got some sniffs of culture, like flyers being handed out and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that was actually how. Yeah, I mean, it's going over a few years, but I remember coming to Manchester for the music scene, really just being really interested in bands like Happy Mondays and New Order, Joy Division, the Stone Roses and things like that. And that was what brought me to Manchester. We used to be here on Thursdays and Friday nights with my mates. One of us would drive and we'd go and watch, a band in kind of the Roadhouse or places like that. And you'd see just this big city and this kind of the bright lights, and you'd think, oh God, I want a bit of that. So it was always a dream to come to Manchester and study here at university. And
so you went to Manchester Met, didn't you?
I did. I've studied at Manchester Met, School of Art now, but at the time was the Metropolitan University, yeah.
And was that, so you say at the time that was more ideas was advertised and design was, I guess, like you said, like the aesthetic of it. Was that what was taught on your course, or?
So the course was called Design and Art Direction, and effectively, my memories of the course was that there was a lot of kind of being left to sort of create your own work and kind of take your own direction and your own journey. And I remember that being kind of quite interesting. It's like you were given opportunities, but fundamentally you were taught how to work independently. I remember there was a tutor, Eric Griswood, and he sort of sat me down after about a year and said, he saw something in me in terms of, the kind of work I was doing, but, he was worried that I was going to, was a bit too lazy, was,
Really?
going out partying, drinking, and he asked me a question and he won't remember it, but he asked me a question. If I had £5 left in my pocket, would I spend it down the student union getting pissed, or would I go out and buy the latest creative review magazine? Of course, I went down to the union, got pissed, and had to think about it. And I realised that that he was making the point. I mean, I was the first person in my family, not just my immediate family, but my cousins, aunts, uncles, anybody, to go to university across the whole of everybody. And it was costing a lot of money. My parents were helping with the money, and it made me realize that I didn't want to regret a missed opportunity whilst I was at university, and that I actually needed to settle down and start to take it seriously. And Eric just saying those kind of words to me resonated, and it was one thing that made its mark on me. Really, was just that sentence, that kind of choose your path carefully, because you don't want to live to regret it.
Yeah, very good advice. That. And what was his name again, Dave? Sorry.
Eric and Lenore Gristwood. They were the tutors back in DNA. They did this. They taught design and art direction at Manchester Met. Eric was a good friend of Richard Morris's as well. Kind of a collective, I think, of kind of creatives. Unfortunately, in them days, lots of white, middle-aged men who kind of had found their way in the advertising design world in the industry. But Eric was a really interesting person, and Eric and Lenore were very interesting. They travelled a lot. They didn't just talk to us about graphic design. They talked to us about finding creativity in every aspect of what you do. So whether that's in architecture or in writing or in reading or in music. And I remember we went to New York as a course, and it opened my eyes to not just going on holiday to get drunk and try and pick up girls, but actually to get, because that's going to Magaluf and Ibiza and places like that, but to go to New York and to see this amazing city, and again, not just go straight to the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building, but to just wander these back streets of, how we didn't get mugged or murdered or arrested, I don't quite know, because I think we found ourselves in places like the Bronx and places like that. But it's a bit like I've just got a puppy dog. And the dog has no fear because it doesn't know what fear is. And I think being a young designer in them days, we didn't have the fear of what we feel now as an older person. We read about all these, don't go down this street because this might happen, and don't take a photo of that because they might be offended. I remember just going around my camera, just taking photos of everybody from beggars to dancers on the street, to people on the subway, and just being like amazed by this big city. And
it's a really interesting point, because I think you can always tell with the designers, those who the lens is kind of like just fixed on the world of design, and then you can always see the designers who have a much broader scope. Because if your lens is fixed on the world of design, then you're just going to end up repeating what you've seen by definition. Like, you can't get away from your influence. That if you're just looking at a designer or a designer movement, whatever it may be, you're going to repeat it in some form. And I think it's fine to find influence, but I think the much more interesting work comes from looking further and wider. And if you can draw in that experience of New York into your work, or if you can draw in that experience of reading that book, or if you can draw in that experience of watching that play, or going for that walk with your dog in the woods, like, you'll see things and you'll hear things. And again, it's going back to that design idea that you're talking about at the beginning, where once you just accept the fact you are a designer, you've got a way of looking, and it's just a constant store then, isn't it? Like, you see things and you don't necessarily memorize it, but on some level, anything that you come across like embeds itself in your subconscious. And then I always think that when you sharpen up as a lateral thinker, if you like your Christmas card, for example, we've mentioned it a couple of times, but how long did it take you probably just had that idea, I'd imagine.
It just came to
slave over it.
It literally was.
And I think that's just an output of that working practice, basically, because you're so used to thinking in that way. You've seen the word gone a million times, and then 2021, and then it's just making those connections after that point.
I think one of the things I often say whenever I do any teaching, lecturing, any work with students is to stay away from things like Pinterest boards and stuff like that. I mean, they fulfill a purpose, and you know, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be hypocritical and suggest that I never look at design blogs or Pinterest boards, because we all do to some extent. But you are always going to be disappointed in the end if that's the only visual reference you can take is Pinterest boards, because you're seeing the finished, polished, finalized piece of work from a designer or design studio or somebody, and you're not seeing the blood, sweat and tears that go before that, and the hundreds of failed attempts to try and create that finished piece, or the client making tweaks and changes, or you struggling until kind of 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning sometimes to really create an idea. And so get your inspiration from other places as well, because you will always struggle if you just use Pinterest as a way to create an idea or to make your work look like somebody else's work. You know, you may answer a brief by using something like Pinterest as a reference point, but you will, in the end, you will look back on that and think, I know I've made that look just like somebody else's work. And actually, deep down inside you, you'll know that you've cheated in a way. And whereas if you get your inspiration from, you know, the way that sort of a building looks when the sun shines on it, and or I don't know, just another idea that comes completely left field out there, then it might not look as polished as those Pinterest pieces that you look at, but it will be a real true concept.
More authentic, wouldn't it? Is there anyone in particular that you've worked in that has had a real influence on you that you've reached out to or come back to you?
Yeah, well, probably the project that comes to mind is a project I did going back a few years ago now with an agency in Barcelona called Lo Siento Studio. And just before I talk about that, it's probably just very quick. I mean, basically, my wife, who's a translator, was working in Barcelona at the time, and she said to me, you know, why don't you come out and spend a couple of weeks, you know, with me in Barcelona? And I said, well, that'd be great. What am I going to do in the daytimes where you're working? She said, well, you can't just go, you know, up and down the bars and on the beach. So I thought to myself, right, okay, why don't I go and see some design agencies and just kind of, you know, meet people. So I set up some meetings before I left. And people were like, well, what do you want to come and see us for? And I was like, just to say hi, just to say hello. And I went to see Borja Martinez at Lo Siento Studio, who's just a really nice guy, really warm, really welcoming. He was just like, yeah, come in, I'll show you around the studio. He was really interested in why I sort of chosen to come from Manchester to meet him. And you know, we just chatted a bit like what we're doing about graphic design and stuff, and we kind of made a connection. And when I returned back to Manchester, I got an email from him saying, you know, we really liked the kind of work you were doing, and would you be interested in helping us kind of work on a project for a client of ours. Now, you know, I learned a lot doing that. And one of the first things I learned was that, you know, it was such a great opportunity, but I was probably clouded slightly because at the time I was freelancing. By that, I mean, I was working in agencies kind of 9 till 5, you know, on the clock, you know, timesheets, account managers. So I was going into agencies and working as a hired help, as a freelancer. And this project came in and I was booked up in an agency at the time. And so I said yes to it, but I said I could only really spend a couple of evenings working on it. Now, it was for a TV and sort of film production company called Cannonball. Now, they'd already got the name, but they didn't have a brand identity. And they wanted me to come up with some ideas. And I just had this really simple idea that came to me whilst I was driving to work one day about using silver ball bearings, like, I guess if you like, cannonballs themselves, to create this kind of typographical brand identity. So I passed it through Lo Siento Studios, told them the idea in an email. They said they absolutely loved the concept and to go away and sort of create something. So I ordered a load of ball bearings off the internet. They arrived. I remember getting some kind of glue and tweezers and trying to make this kind of typographical kind of piece of work, which I'd never done before. I remember there was just glue everywhere. There was hair, food. It was all stuck in. It just looked a mess. But it was a great idea. And I took some photos of it, sent it to Lo Siento, and You know, he was really polite. He sort of sent me this email back with really big type that said, "We absolutely love it." And then at the bottom, in really small text in the email, it just said, "Send us the ball bearings, please." So I glued them all down like they were stuck. I couldn't actually like take them apart. So I said, "I'm really sorry, like they're all glued together and that's a bit of a mess." So I said, "But I got them from this company online."
Yeah.
So I sent him the link. I didn't hear anything for like 2 weeks, and then he just sent me these visuals that they'd done, and it just completely blew me away. Like they'd taken my idea of using these sort of silver ball bearings, but they'd used a grid system by getting a piece of kind of MDF wood, laser cutting holes, a grid of holes, a bit like your t-shirt or jumper that you've got on there today, and actually placing these ball bearings in the exact place where, to create the words cannonball, whereas I glued them together, kind of making like a bit like a kind of kinetic sand piece of, or Play-Doh, this kind of mess of type. They had this beautifully aligned grid system, and it really made me realize that, yes, I had this great idea, but actually had experience in executing that idea, and sometimes you need to work together to get an end product. But they still, thankfully, they still referenced that the original idea was mine. They paid me for the time I'd spent on it. Perhaps if I'd had more time, perhaps if I'd just dedicated more time to it, maybe I would have come up with something, like the grid system with the laser cut holes. I may have got to that point because I knew it wasn't quite working, but I didn't know how to take it to the next stage. And thankfully, collaborating with somebody allowed that to happen.
Was that before you did the BCN MCR exhibition?
Yeah, BCN MCR is really interesting in the grander question of making your mark, because this is, we're on 2012, I think, maybe 2013. Basically, gone to Barcelona with, for a slightly extended holiday in inverted commas, because my wife was working there. So, and got in touch with agencies to see about going in and speaking to them, because I was really interested in the European design scene, in particular Spain, and even in more particular Barcelona. I just love the city, love the kind of work that seems to be coming out of Barcelona. So I thought, it'd be a good excuse to go and meet some of those agencies and talk to them. And it was actually, literally, I had no idea I wanted to do an exhibition or an event called BCN MCR. I just went in, started chatting to Lo Siento Studio, and it just kind of came out of my mouth as we were talking. Oh, wouldn't it be good to do an exhibition of your work in Manchester? I was working at the time for a client called 2022, which was like a gallery design nightclub bar down in the basement in the northern quarter. And so I knew we had a space, and I knew Jamie, who ran the space, would be really keen on any ideas that I kind of wanted to try and fulfill. So I sort of knew I had the space, but I had never done an event before. I'd never ran anything like this before. And I just said it, and he seemed really excited by it and really interested. And then it allowed me then to go to the next agency, which was Hey Studio. And I met Veronica at Hey Studio, and basically I kind of said, I'd spoken to Lo Siento, and they were really keen to do this design event in Manchester. Would you be interested? So I was kind of like just thinking on the hop, really, like about putting on this event. It reminds me of back in the day when you were trying to organize a night out with your mates, and you'd find somebody's landline and say, Are you coming out? And they'd say, oh no, I can't be bothered. So you'd ring someone else and you'd lie and say, oh yeah, he says he's definitely coming, do you want to come? And they'd be like, oh yeah, well, I don't want to miss out. And that's what happened with the Barcelona stuff. Each agency wanted to be part of it because I'd got one of them to say yes. And so I came back to Manchester. We need to explain what BCN MCR became. At the time, I didn't know what it was going to be, but it became not only an exhibition of all their work in a gallery space, but I actually managed to persuade them to fly over to Manchester to spend a couple of days in the city, and and I put on basically a design event, really, a series of talks by these agencies, which Mucho was one of the agencies, Lo Siento Studio, Mayuskula, and Hey Studio. Now you'd probably pay somewhere in about kind of £50 for a ticket for that right now. I think I charged £9 for a ticket. or something like that. And we had about 60 to 70 seats in 2022. The tickets went on sale about 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and by the time I got out of the shower, they'd all gone completely, and people were really excited about it. And I realised at that point that shit, I've actually got to make this happen. I had got no money from anybody. There was no sponsorship. Marketing Manchester and companies like that seemed quite interested when I emailed them, but when you delved a little bit further, they had no funds. So I paid for it all myself. I paid for their flights. I paid for their hotels. I paid for the frames. Team Impression printed the work for me. Grateful they did that for me. As a freebie to be part of the event. But effectively, it cost me money to put that event on. I think, like I say, I sold some of the tickets, so I made a little bit back, but nowhere near what it cost. And but it was just a really, really interesting event. It was really exciting. I remember getting that buzz on the night, putting the event on, and showing these people around Manchester and getting to know them, and really kind of connecting to cities that I absolutely loved. I loved Manchester. I loved Barcelona. I just brought the two together for a design event. So yeah, we did that in the first year, and then I learned so much from that I did it again. Stupidly, I did it again a year later. We got a much bigger venue this time. We did it at the Halle St. Peter's in Ancoats, which is this beautiful refurbished church. Got more agencies. I think there was about 7 or 8 agencies this time came over. But I got sponsorship. Shillington College sponsored it. Estrella Damm, the beer company, they sponsored it. Creative Review sponsored it. And so I was able to, and I charged a lot more for tickets. So I think I broke even in the second year. And then my wife got pregnant, and we decided that was the end of doing design events because I just didn't have the time anymore. But it's coming up to almost 10 years. So I'd quite like to do a kind of
I've still got 2 prints from the first one on my office wall at uni.
Have you?
Hacienda and Ian Curtis. Yeah. Again, these places, when you visit them for the first or second time, or even like third or fourth, like they do make the mark on you, don't they? And they do influence the way that you do things to a point of actually creating an exhibition, which is incredible.
And I think for me, like with the exhibition, just that made my, again, said at the start that I'm not sure we made my mark, and I think that's really important to say that. But I just started freelancing. Me and you had worked at an agency together for a few years, and I'd left that agency and started freelancing. Again, just to clarify for me what freelancing was, because now I don't do it anymore. I work for my own clients. This was actually going and working in-house in agencies and designing for their clients, on a kind of hourly or daily paid amount of money. So I just started going out and working in agencies in Manchester, and I was doing BC and MCR, like again, in the evenings at weekends. And when I say doing it, I mean promoting it, creating the website, emailing the agencies, organising the print, organising the event. And when that kind of launched, it to some extent, people who probably had no idea what I was doing or who I was in Manchester and just had never met me, started to sort of figure out that I was somebody doing interesting stuff in the city. And again, that just massively opened doors for me. So although I didn't make any money on the first event, I did get work from it because the Cervantes Institute, the Spanish Institute in the city, they came to the event, met me, and then they briefed me on a load of work, which I did over the course of a few years. And in the end, if I added up all those invoices for that client, it covered the cost of doing the event. So yes, I had to lose a little bit of money, but in the long run, everything sort of broke even. But yeah, it kind of made my mark in the sense of people started to like look at, me. And again, going back to what you said about followers on social media, I probably got a tremendous amount of those followers from doing that, really.
I mean, so since that point on, I mean, the actual the amount of design that you produce, when I was looking back through it, it just seems like phenomenal, the actual amount of stuff. Like get through. Is that I don't know, is that from, do you think like BC and MCR catapulted you into the point where you had brief after brief coming in, or was there still a point you going after them?
I thought you were going to say then, so from BC and MCR it's all been downhill because well, in some ways what what it did is it opened a lot more doors. Yeah. And I definitely feel that began a journey over the last kind of, 9 years, which has just been, people contacting me to produce. They've seen work that I've done and they're contacting me because they like that work. And that was something, to be honest with you, Ted, that I'd always wanted to achieve, was not necessarily getting briefs from clients because they just want something doing, but actually coming to me because they'd seen the ideas and the work I'd already done for other clients. And so they already knew what they were going to get. That's wrong. It's probably they knew what they were going to get, but they knew this sort of aesthetic and style and the way I worked, and they wanted to be part of that. And I get a tremendous amount of people contacting me now saying, oh, I saw the work you did for Track Brewery, or you did for Mancoco, the coffee, the independent coffee brand in Manchester.
Yeah.
We love it. We have that coffee every day, and we want you to do, our branding work.
Okay.
So I've been fortunate, and I'm really fortunate, and I'm totally aware of I am that, a lot of the lands on my door now comes from people who've seen stuff I've done and want me to do something for them, as opposed to wanting me to design something that totally doesn't fit my style or my beliefs or my background, or that kind of a certain way of working. But going back to the amount of work I do, I mean, it's probably unhealthy, but it's design. I love creating work. I love coming up with ideas. If a client doesn't like one idea, I'll come up with another one. I mean, there's just infinite amount of ideas and ways of working, and I just really believe that you never really fully finish your work. It's like you never finish your portfolio as a student. Students say, how many pieces of work should I have in my portfolio, and when is it complete? It's never complete. It's constantly evolving and changing, and it's complete the day you finally put down that pen and paper, or you turn your computer off, or whatever tools you're going to be using in 20, 30, 40 years time. It's never finished. It's never over.
Where I live, not many people will know it. It's just a town, a village, kind of like in North Manchester. But suddenly it's doing quite well, and it's having restaurants and bars. But you've recently designed one for, well, it's called Osma, but I believe you named it.
Yeah, I named it. Yeah, I came up with a name because the two founders, one is from Oslo in Norway and the other one's from Manchester. They didn't have a name for this at all, so I just basically, and it's a fusion, if you like, of kind of Scandinavian types of foods, but with a kind of Mancunian northern sort of twist to it. So it was a simple way to just bring the first two letters of the name, because there's two of them, so it was the first two letters. And it was just like bringing the two names together, really.
That's an idea in its classic sense, isn't it, of making a connection?
Yeah.
And was that, were those kind of projects that you're doing, are these the things that where people are making contact with you, if you like?
You know what? That came about really, really interestingly. I got this, and I hope Danielle won't mind me saying, because she was the client. But it was just this really random email from a Google email account. There was no kind of contact details on it. It was just something as simple as like, could you help us create a brand for something we're doing? And they didn't even say where they were, where they'd found me from, or anything. And sometimes I get them and I just think this is going to go nowhere, but I always reply to them, and you never know. And I replied to that one.
Interesting, isn't it?
And then I called her because she gave me a number, and she was lovely, and we just chatted. And I think she'd seen some stuff I'd done for one or two places in Manchester, a bar or a restaurant or something, and she just loved it. And she was like, yeah, we kind of want to work with you. So I met with them and got on with them, and I really like what they're doing. They're really young. They're in their 20s, a couple, and they're just, they're making a difference. They're, obviously they've had a really difficult opening. They've opened during coronavirus, but I know they're producing great food, and I think they'll continue to go on and do really good things. But again, talking about opening doors, the place next door to them I'm working with those guys on a project at the moment as well. So, because they've seen it and they like it. So definitely good work leads to good work. Being nice to people leads to other people wanting you to be nice to them. It's just making connections.
The simple things, aren't they? But
at the end of the day, like, being interested in everything is really important. And as a designer, whether you're at university, college, whether you've graduated and you're starting your career, or whether you're a 41-year-old man like me, like, you have to keep that interest up all the time.
Mm.
I'm not, in any way, shape, or form, never have been, never will be cool. But you have to sort of know that there's, what's going on in the world, like in the music industry and the media industry and social media. You have to keep a kind of an interest in everything, and to allow you to produce the kind of work you do. But equally, like, clients will come to you. They might come from something as interesting or as crazy as, I don't know, the water industry, or I don't know, they might make component parts for a light bulb. You have to be interested in that, because you have to learn about what that client's need, wants, and desires are, and then you have to fulfill the brief, or you have to solve a problem, and you have to be a designer to do that. So if you're not interested in things, then you'll probably give up quite quickly in the design world.
And I'm conscious of time a little bit, Dave, so I just wanted to finish on a recent project, which I guess if we talked about making your mark from being a student through to where you are now, I mean, globally, recently you've earned recognition for the Foil Co project.
Yeah.
And Multiplicity. If you were just happy to talk about that a little bit, how it started and where it came from.
Well, again, that ties everything in quite nicely, because Foil Co as a client contacted me on the back of what they'd seen me do with BC and MCR, because they wanted to impact and the design industry a little bit more. So just very quickly, what Foil Co do is they produce and distribute foils. So any kind of packaging or print design where a foil's been used, they've probably had a hand in that. So they work directly with printers, often to just give them the foils. But they realized a while ago that actually they were working directly with printers a lot, and if they could get in at the designer stage, so creatives who would actually specify their foils, a bit like how we specify papers,
okay,
we go to the likes of GF Smith or Fedrigoni for that. Foil Co wanted designers to know them and to specify their foils to a printer, as opposed to a printer just choosing whichever foil they wanted.
Yeah.
So Foil Co, for example, I think they do about 60 different types of golds, different shades of gold, whereas most of us would just say put a gold foil on it. Printer would just choose a gold, just whichever one they wanted. What Foil Co wanted was designers to say specify a particular color of gold, and in order to do that, they spoke to myself and another guy called Luigi at Design OSC about basically putting on design events for designers where Foil Co could sort of sponsor it. And they didn't want it to be like a hard sell. They didn't want it to be them guys stood up on stage talking for kind of an hour about foil. They wanted designers to turn up on a Thursday evening, have a few beers, and watch these kind of watch a series of designers talk their lives and their work. So we kind of came up with this concept called Multiplicity, and that's where I started working with Foil Co, because I started to make connections in the design world, started to work with the likes of Anthony Burrell and people like that, and obviously my connections with BC and MCR. So they asked me if I could help kind of put those events on. I think we've done about 7 or 8 now Multiplicity events over the last 3 or 4 years. And we've done them around, mostly in the UK, from Glasgow, Edinburgh, Manchester, Leeds, London, Bristol, Brighton. But we did our last one in Denmark just before coronavirus.
Yeah, I remember.
And we've, it's been brilliant to do those. And I've met and worked with a tremendous amount of creatives along the way.
I mean, incredible caliber of people at those events, isn't there?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I'm really fortunate again that the people that I really admire and my kind of heroes and heroines in the design world, I've been able to kind of to ask them to be part of those events. And of course, I think it's important to say as well, they don't get paid for that time. Obviously, we cover all their expenses. It doesn't cost them any money. They're just really happy to do it, and I guess it goes back to being a nice person and just asking them in the right way, and being able to persuade them to take part in the events. Yeah. But Multiplicity was where it started, and I've been really grateful to they allow me to create the kind of brand identity for each of these events. But then we realized that they were starting to make their mark in the design world, but their branding, their logo, their identity, and everything about what they did just looked awful. I think they'd either done it themselves or they'd had it done really cheaply a few years ago. And so, they're quite open-minded, and they had the vision to realize that they needed a brand to be created that just looked a little bit more in the kind of world that they wanted to move in, and to be more akin with what designers wanted to be associated associated with Foil Co. So, you know, we looked at creating a brand identity for those guys, and obviously I'm sure you'll be showing some images. And you know, if you look at foil and you look at it from its end on a roll, it is effectively a circle, and it's just this series of it's just foil, just like a carpet, really, if you like, or a paper just rolled up around the tube. But also when I started to talk to them, I realized that they had kind of like eight sectors that they worked in, and they had like eight key, but we worked out that they had kind of eight key beliefs or internal kind of, if you like, manifestos that they worked towards. And they had actually eight types of foils, so metallics, pigments, sheens, holographics, if you like. We broke that down into eight. So this number eight was really important. What was nice about it is that it almost represented this kind of infinity symbol. And because they do hundreds of different types of foils, the range of foils that you can use as a designer, infinite possibilities, really. You can mix and match so many different types that you can just, you can go on forever. So that was really nice. And then just created this symbol out of these eight circles that, again, I'm sure you'll show it. It kind of created this overall symbol with the F in the center to represent Foil Co, right at the middle, right at the heart of everything. Got some beautiful photography, and we commissioned Rick Banks to create a typeface based around the idea as well. So that's really nice flowing typography to it. And yeah, thankfully, like, the brand compared to what it was is massively moving in the right direction. So I'm still working with Foil Co. We've got loads of really exciting projects on the go at the moment. We're hopefully later this year we'll be able to start up the design events again, the multiplicity events. And we miss those. And yeah, there's a great client to work with, and and I'm really proud of the work that I do for those guys.
It's how you've embraced technology and change and the internet and everything else, be it through Instagrams or Twitters. How your work's actually got out there and how you actually work with it. I think it's fascinating, but also throughout all that, you've just created great work, really, just still sticking to that core idea of a really simple, clean idea, beautifully executed, which is what we think, or I think certainly, is like the sense of graphic design, really. Without the idea, it's nothing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I remember Lo Ciento said to me, like, the idea is the soul of everything. So, I mean, for me, that is exactly it. If you've got an idea to something, everything else should flow. Also, aesthetically, you're always going up against a client's opinion about, a colour or a font or a way of designing something. They're always sort of saying, oh, I don't like the colour blue, or I don't like the colour red. Whereas if the idea is right, it's an idea.
It's logic that you can't refuse then, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely, yeah.
So let's wrap it up if you can. I mean, we've just got one final question, which is basically, it's 2021. The world is upside down, for better or worse. We thought it was the right way around. It's gone a bit upside down again. And there's no magic potion. There's no elixir. It's just, if you have any advice for 2021, really. I mean, I think being a student is pretty much the same, really, as it was in any other year. It's just that this year we've seen from studios that they're still creating great work and that still great things are happening. So there's still things are just happening as they were, but just from homes and bedrooms. But for students in a similar boat, what would you be doing in 2021?
It's a really good question. I think all of us are finding it hard. I think that's the first thing to remember. I mean, obviously, I'm working in my spare room. It's a tiny little room. I've got, if you pan the camera around, you see our washing basket full, and the crap that I've just pushed over there. So everybody's lives are in a very different way at the moment, and I think that's the first thing to remember, that you're not alone. We're all going through tough times. We're all in the same boat. I think, to summarize it, really, and I'm going to say this, it sounds really easy to say it, but I'll try and explain what I mean by it in a minute. I think the biggest key word, my advice I would give to any student now, whether it's 2021 or whatever year it is about using your own initiative. And by that, I think using your time wisely. So it's easy to, because you're not having to get in for lectures all the time, maybe, or get into university, or actually get out of bed, go to college, and then come home again. It's easy to fall into a trap of like putting things off for tomorrow, but time is the most important thing that we have, and it's about how you use that time wisely. Now is your opportunity to really get a social media presence that we talked about. You know, get yourself a Twitter page and an Instagram page. Get yourself some simple website. If you don't know how to code a site, that's fine. Neither do I. But there's things like Squarespace and companies like that that can really help you. You know, get your portfolio worked on. Take as much advice as you can from the lecturers. You know, if you like designers' work, get in touch with them, ask them for feedback, advice, ask them for what they would do in the similar situation. Like I said early on in the conversation, you know, start to walk around your town, your village, your city, and look at bad design that is all around us and think, how could you do it better? Set your own briefs. One of the things I find when I see a lot of students' portfolios is they're always very well done and they're brilliant, but sometimes you find a lot of them have very similar briefs in them because they're set, especially if they come from the same course. So someone would come in, show you a brief that was set on the course, and then somebody comes a week later, it's the same brief, and a week later it's the same brief, and then suddenly out of nowhere a student will come in and say, oh, by the way, my dad's mate has a kind of I don't know, he's in a choir and they wanted a logo doing, so I did this, and you're like, whoa, your ears prick because it's totally new and it shows initiative again. So I think, you know, setting your own targets and your own briefs and almost giving yourself 24 hours to come up with an idea and to execute it, get it printed, put it in your portfolio or whatever. You know, you've got to keep going and you've got to keep moving all the time. Keep on keeping on is the main thing. Just keep on doing things. Keep on being as creative as you can be. Don't beat yourself up. It's tough. It's hard. Some days you might get a lot of work done. Other days you might get very little done. But the end goal is the same no matter what. And be really conscious of the fact that if you're genuinely not working because you just can't be bothered and you just want to watch Netflix constantly, or, you know, I understand it's hard, but just remember that the people who are also on your course and the people on all the other courses around the UK at the moment, they're all going to be fighting for similar jobs and similar roles, and it's up to you to kind of, you know, to get there. So keep that kind of mentality.
Yeah, it's just the only one that you can rely on ultimately, and that's why it's interesting that with you in your own studio, like the only person that you can rely on is yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
If you're ill, what do you do?
Yeah, definitely. That comes back to like being a student. Yeah, at the end of the day, no one else is going to get the degree for you. No one else is going to produce the work. No one else is going to get you the job. And I think when you realise that, it's sort of something triggers in your mind to make you realise that you're not at school anymore, or, you know, you're not being handheld. It's about you grasping the nettle and actually really kind of finding your way in the world now, and taking advantage of the likes of you, you know, and being a tutor and a lecturers and all the people who you know as well. You know, we've all been there and we can offer advice. In the end, unfortunately, the only person who can make the change here is the students themselves. So they've just got to get out there and just keep working, and don't be afraid to fuck things up along the way and make mistakes and do something really badly. You know, it's just about kind of learning and being creative and keep doing stuff every day, just doing something different.
Yeah, it's tricky, but I think that is the only way. We've definitely seen it through what we're seeing come out. Even the work that we're seeing come out within the studio has, you know, it's excellent, and it's just a question of redirecting it to the people who can see it at these points. But I think that's great advice, in that if you can set yourself a way of working, a practice for everyday life, and get used to it and embrace it now, because the earlier you do and get that in place, it will only stand to benefit you later on.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, if this had happened, this pandemic had happened when we were at university, for example, I mean, there would be no Zoom. I mean, email wasn't even really going. I mean, anyone who still listens to this talk will be like, Jesus, how old is he? But, you know, it is like you've got everything now that we didn't have a few years ago. So take advantage of that. And, you know, these Zoom calls are a little bit awkward at times, and you get, you know, delays sometimes, and you get cut out. But actually, students now, if they can embrace this could change the whole way that agencies work in the future. And if you can work okay during a pandemic, then Jesus Christ, you can work okay during, you know, a normal time. That's the way to look at it.
I think that's an excellent point to finish on, Dave.
Right, good.
If we can make it here, we'll make it anywhere.
Exactly. I need a toilet anyway because I am getting old. So yeah, perfect. All right, mate.
Well, thank you very much, Dave.
No problem.